Good evening. It is Tuesday, January 17th, time for the second monthly meeting of the Richmond Water and Sewer Commissioners. Hope everybody had a good Martin Luther King Day. That's why we're here today on Tuesday versus yesterday, because yesterday was a holiday. Before we begin, would anybody joining us either virtually or in person care to make a statement? No? Good online? Okay, moving on. Josh, board, any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda?
I would like to briefly bring up Heidi's email.
Okay.
Heidi Borman sent an email for those of you who don't get my email, sent an email asking about the fixed cost and the rates for residential versus commercial for her business and for her residential units. And I didn't know, I don't have the answers to provide her. So I just wondered if we could briefly touch on that.
Is that the email from today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, she sent it. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Bart.
I will add, I had a half-hour conversation with Heidi about rates and related items. I would recommend that we put this as a warned agenda item.
Okay.
Because it speaks to questions of equity separate from the issue we've been talking about, the number of units. A reminder, the overall structure is each customer group pays for their share. Like if this customer group uses 30%, we say you pay 30% of the total cost. But then within those groups, the base fee and the user fee structure is not the same. So that's just something we should contemplate. I think it merits review.
Okay.
I think we have previous PowerPoints where we presented this, and it probably works better if we come prepared with that PowerPoint that says, here's how the rate structure works.
That sounds like a fine idea instead of just
one question. Since you did your PowerPoint, just the only thing is if any of the rates have changed, because there was discussion with COVID in the school if something changed there. So that's, I think, one question to be answered separately from the existing rates. Is if you did anything different there, update the public on that. That's all.
And I think the short answer is the methodology. It's based on the previous year's worth of the most complete previous year, if I remember correctly. But anyway, we can go through it. It looks at a previous actual use. So if the school was up here and went down for a couple of years, it would drop down. And then when it picks up, it would pick up over time, as one suspects other businesses, if they as a group all went down, their share would go down. And then if it goes up, the share would go up.
You're saying the flat rate fluctuates?
No,
versus usage?
It's there. Each year we say what percentage of total budget and usage is associated with this user group.
Gotcha.
So if they use 30% one year and 20% the next year, 20% would be less than 30%, and that percentage would shift to the other users.
Which potentially doesn't this stabilization of flat rates.
Well, so flat rate will fluctuate.
Distribution.
Well, flat rate will fluctuate based on previous year's usage and then the budget as far as And there was one year that we used the previous year's water data because we were concerned that it was skewed because of COVID.
Yeah.
So that's what you're talking about. Whereas this year, I think we used the most recent previous year because it kind of went back to this is our normal now, whatever that.
So that's all I'm saying is
So
if you've done
dive into
it. It might not have been part of your presentation. You might have to do a little add on.
The last budget presentation probably had most of it there.
We could start with that and see if there's anything we need to add to that.
Yep.
Right. I just think it's since I don't have y'all's experience, and I've seen the spreadsheet, but there's a lot I found I did not know. So I would like to be part of that.
Yeah.
And the way, just a final comment, the way Josh has improved the spreadsheets, you can kind of change the percentages and it will ripple into everything else through cell references.
Very much so. Very much so.
Great.
Okay,
Try to make it easy.
Yes.
Okay, any other additions or deletions to the agenda? So we will discuss rates and the Borman letter at the next meeting. Looks like we're ready to begin. Review of the monthly water data from December of 2022. Josh, did you want to lead that discussion?
Sure. Let me share my screen here so we can just sort of look at the same thing. So
can you zoom way in on that, Josh? Because people home on their computers can't see it that well.
So this is included in the packet online. Alan highlighted areas where numbers were below the recommendations. So starting with chlorine, we're trying to keep that at 0.1 or higher. So you'll see there's a couple of times there where it dipped a little bit lower on daily counts, but overall, the average for the month was 0.39 at the beginning of the process, 0.27 at the end. You're going to expect a few small fluctuations from day to day. And then in fluoride, there was only one day when we were below the 0.6 recommendation, mandate from the state, which is on the program. And overall, we were at 0.7. The target is 0.6 to 1.0, with 0.7 sort of being the optimal. So we're right there, I think, for where we need to be with fluoride. We were talking about this a bit last time. The pH meter for the pH measuring at the beginning of the water process has been broken. So we were waiting on all the parts for the final pH meter to get here, and then we'll install that. So hopefully we have that rather soon so we can measure it.
Bart? Oh, Jay.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm trying to remember. I know that the differences in either the fluorine level or chloride level have to do with, they have to mix some stuff up and pour it in, and if they don't mix it quite right or they get something wrong, it drops, but only for a day or so. Which one is that? Was explained for chlorine?
That's the fluoride.
Fluoride.
So it does it when they have a new batch, it sometimes can drop. Although we were seeing those numbers drop in November, and then they sort of tweaked or perfected the mixing process. So now we're not seeing as much of a drop. So you see the new batch of fluoride. There's a slight drop there, and then when we added the next one, it was remained pretty consistent. So I think that staff has addressed that, but that was a concern or issue in November.
And then the chloride, do we have an explanation?
Same thing, right? They added a bunch of water when they mixed it, so it dropped with the fluoride. So it looks like they mixed them at the same time.
Alan's on the line. He could probably better explain the chlorine than I could. Alan,
Yeah, that was kind of what I was thinking, but
you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Cool. The chlorine, we had the water off that. We had the water pump off that day, so that was what was in the line down there. So that was lower than when it's running. It's higher.
is that pump ever not? Is there ever a reason for the pump not to be running?
It cycles, but we turn it on every day. But it was off because the fluoride was settling out.
So Alan, you're talking about when you pump out of the well versus when you're running on the tank, right?
Okay.
Yes.
So there's sometimes when you're not continually pumping from the well because you've got enough in the system and it's not a continual process.
Okay.
So that's
There's no
what
need to
you're
pump.
saying. The chlorine went down that day.
The chlorine went down because there was not pumping into the tank.
And that means that I think at that point, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm following, you're only adding the chlorine as you're pumping water into the system. Is that right, Alan?
Yes.
So that's where I
get
think it dipped down during that day, it sounds like.
Art?
Alan, I think it's a question for you. So are you reading the meter at about the same time every day? And what I'm focused on is the third column that says gallons, and the variance is pretty significant from about 20,000 to like 140,000 gallons per day. And that would be a significant variation unless maybe we read the meter at different times of the day, which would help to explain the variance.
It depends on how much usage is in town and how long it runs based on the level of the tank. If it's a lot of water use one day, it'll run a little longer one day. Or if it's almost full and you turn it on, it'll be on for a short time, then it will be off for a little while longer.
Right. So this gallon is gallons leaving the wellhead or the source to go to the tank?
That would be from the water house to the system. Yes.
and so I think that illustrates the point. The tank is up there and it stays pretty full, and then we put a little to top it off, and then other days a lot to top it off. So this is partially, but not entirely, a measure of daily use. And I just point out that the variation, it's pretty, I was struck by the high versus the low in this.
Right, like between the 7th and 8th.
If we go down a little, I think there's some even higher.
14, 15, 16, that's pretty extreme.
So does this,
Or the 25th.
Yeah.
so and when the pump turns on is manually, or is there like a float in a tank that triggers it?
It's a digital level control that it turns on at 21.5 and shuts off at 23.5 feet.
Oh, feet. So it's a pressure gauge at the bottom of the tank then?
There's essentially a pressure reading that turns it on.
Not a float.
Is this a standard form report, or is this a report that we provide to the state?
This goes to the state.
So, I mean, like, you can't change the headers at all and say from water source to tank for that gallon reading kind of thing. So
Well, we've got a little guide to, it's the second item in the packet after this that tells how to interpret this. And I think
right, but the question is, are these gallons being used, the Bard's question, are these gallons being used out of the tank, or are these gallons going from the source to the tank? And if it's from the source to the tank, can't you just put that gallon, from source to tank in gallons?
So in the guide,
From the
I don't know,
to the system.
I don't know what we're able to change on the form. I'm not, Alan, do you know if that's a form that's provided by the state that we have to fill out the way that they have it?
I'm assuming it's like the WR-43 is like the wastewater. There's essentially it's got to be in the state's format, because in the end, the state has, they used to end up having to have someone transcribe all that into the EPA website, but the standard format for what the state wants to see. So the regulators can look down and make sure it's following the parameters in the permits.
Okay. Well, just like you're writing hand notes right there on the side and you're highlighting in different colors, I think you can just write a little note then at the top that says from water source to tank.
That's also why we have a one-page guide that details.
It gives you the
all
definition,
ways and
yeah.
why things are.
If you have that question, Bart, and you've read that all.
And part of it's for people to understand what we're looking at, because if anyone else looked at as I did at that column, it sort of like would help to explain perhaps some variation given what's going up
Right.
there.
Yeah, sometimes I'm just too lazy.
Trying to make everything user friendly.
Okay, any other questions on the monthly water data? Thank you, Alan. Next, discussion of electronic water meters. Josh, did you want to lead this discussion? I skimmed over it, but you know more than I do.
Sure. So Alan reached out to EJP to ask about electronic water meters, and we had a good meeting with the representative from them about how the meters work and how much they cost. So starting with the system that we're on right now, each meter has to be approached by a staff member to be read. There's two types of meters that we have. One actually has a dial, and you just look at the dial and record that number in the paper. Others, there's like a touch screen, Alan, I think, where you like sort of scan it and then it tells you what the amount is that is read. For either one, you have to physically go to that meter to look at. Then you come back to admin here at Town Center, talk with Connie. They said they put it in. It takes a couple hours to put everything manually into the system. The way the electronic meters work is they put them in, and then you would download everything from the system onto a device, drive around basically as long as you get close enough to each one. You know you're done because you have a list of everything that got downloaded that you're supposed to read. When that list is gone, you've got everything that you need to get. So it takes a system that takes, what do we say?
20 hours to 2 hours.
Yeah, it takes like 10 hours or 10 to 16 hours to read the meters, and you're down to about an hour driving around, grabbing the data.
And less chance of transcription errors.
Absolutely, yeah, because then it all uploads directly right to the account in memory. So it just goes right in. So there's no sitting down and transcribing anything. The The cost for the software and hardware to set up is about $10,000. Then there's a support plan, which is about $3,600 per month, providing technical support for the hardware and software.
Per year.
Sorry, per year.
I was like,
Excuse me.
oh,
No,
what?
per year, per year. Per
With that change, yeah.
Then the cost per, so then the cost per meter is about $380 per residential house and about $1,800 for commercial accounts with higher flows, like a restaurant. So maybe not,
Wait, can you slow down 1 second?
sorry,
Wait, so how much for the residential?
about 380 for a residential meter and 1,800 for a commercial account, but that might vary because if you have an office, you don't have a larger service line, it might be more like a residential meter. If you have a restaurant, it's probably going to be closer to 1,800 if you have a higher flow.
Can I ask you one question? Do you have any of the digital or smart meters or any of those touch ones that he's talking about? Are any of those actually smart meters?
Yeah, so those he talked about that those would be less costly to convert. So you wouldn't have to replace the whole meter. You just do a smaller sort of modification for that type of meter. So that way it could turn into a smart meter. It would, and I think he said, I write that down. It would be less than the 380. And Alan, at that time, Alan, you didn't know how many of those we have, I think, last time we talked, right?
I haven't tallied them, how many we have, no.
But for those meters, it would be less, yes.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I
No,
just wanted to,
those are good
you're rattling numbers.
clarifications.
I want to just make sure it's sinking in. So it's 10 grand for the cost of basically the software
Right,
and
and
the digital reading
I
devices.
think that was 10 grand, I think, for the software and the digital devices.
3,600 a year to just keep being able to use this feature.
Yep.
But then there's the cost of the 380 per residence for the meter and 1,800 for commercial.
Right.
And we don't know how many residential and commercial ones we would have at those prices. And we don't know how many are transition converters.
Right. We don't have those numbers right now.
Okay, and so we do not have an inventory of what we have for existing meters currently.
We do not. No.
Guess we know what we need to do next.
So then looking at paying for the meters, I was talking with Alan about that, and he says that sort of the practice has been when a new house or a new building goes in, the owner pays for that meter, but then when it needs to be replaced, the Water Resources Department is paid for the meter. I looked into our ordinances and policies and couldn't find it written anywhere that states who's supposed to pay for the meter. So we can go with what's been practiced, but we'll likely to get some pushback, I'd imagine, from people saying, well, you're changing all the meters. Why should I have to pay for that? So that's another piece that we would have to figure out.
David, I'll just say my meter failed once, if not twice, over 30-ish years. And I don't think I was charged either time for a replacement meter. So I think it's been viewed as the system's meter, not my personal meter.
It's like your electric
In
meter.
history.
Same thought process with an electric
No,
meter.
I don't.
It's a utility.
I'm not a customer, but I think this would be a great idea if we can find the money to.
Well, if this is the cost, could we turn, like, let's round numbers 100 grand plus, right? Can we quantify the benefit in terms of
Hours saved. and,
cost avoided?
You know, you have some estimates here. I don't remember what they were, but
Yeah.
2 hours versus,
20.
yeah,
So
that's
Yeah.
quite a bit.
You're saving about, 20 hours per quarter, roughly, on staff hours.
So 80, and then there's, I wonder if we can quantify any benefit of accuracy, or that is.
So
error.
Yes.
the representative from EJP did say that usually when you put newer meters in like this, they actually measure more water.
More
So
water.
right now we're probably under measuring. Uh-oh.
but the other thing is, if
Well,
something were to happen and the meter's like metering a lot, usage goes up, would that be flagged before you go at the end of the quarter to read it?
Do you have to drive
Yeah.
around and every day and say, let's see if anybody's going out of control, or is there some way a runaway could ping a thing in the system?
Yeah, I think unless you actually drive around and read it, you're not gonna know that the meter's spinning. Like if all of a sudden somebody's using 1,000 gallons a day, you're not gonna necessarily catch that.
I thought there was meters that could do that though.
There might be, I mean, this is just one review that we had of it. Maybe
Yeah,
there's some that-
meters.
And what's the theoretical functional lifespan of one of these?
I don't know.
Okay, because I mean, if they last for 30 years, that's, you know, one thing. If they last for 10, they have to replace it, obviously.
Right.
When we're quantifying, you know, we're doing the arithmetic.
I believe that the census current ones, the battery life's 10 years on them. So they're probably about the same lifespan, a 10-year lifespan, I would assume.
So back of the envelope calculations, 80 hours per year times 10 years, 800 hours at whatever we're paying people. And then divide that by 114,000, give or take. I think and if especially if we want it billing for more water, I certainly think it's worth exploring.
I have a question, you know, for those systems that have moved to smart meters, what was their logic to do it? Because it seems to me lots of other systems have done this, so they must have seen a benefit and or cost benefit in doing it, whether it was staff time, accuracy. You know, like, I'm not even sure if like Burlington has smart meters. I think now I'm not even sure they go out and read them. I don't know how smart they are. Like, are they smart enough to send a message? Right. Are they like Wi-Fi enabled? You know, so I'm out of my element or past.
I believe it's a matter of size, I believe.
Go on.
So I believe, if I remember correctly, a lot of places did that because they had 2,000 meters. And they, instead of trying to do it all in a short period of time, they took a 5 or 10 year period or 5-year period and started upgrading. So it was an all 1 year project. They did it for many years.
If I recall correctly, that's kind of how Green Mountain Power did their smart meters. You had a year, and that year yours was going to be replaced.
Yeah, but then but theirs, they don't drive around to read your
No,
meter.
theirs they don't have to.
So I think there's other meters out there.
Yeah, if you pay a little more, it maybe can use cell signal.
And are we replacing the meter in 10 years or just the battery in the meter?
Right.
Yeah, that's the whole meter. You have to go into the house literally and replace the meter when it dies.
I'm talking about the life of the smart meter that Bart asked about. You said replace the battery?
They don't make them to replace the battery because people could tamper with them. They're designed so you can't change the battery or nothing. You just got to throw the meters away when they break.
Jeez.
That's freaking brilliant.
I'm struck by a couple
That's
things. Again, you know, a simple analog meter, it's not like the technology is going to expire at a certain point and we have to replace it to be in compliance with the new technology. I don't like being reliant on a perpetual, I'll call it, protection plan to be able to use the product that you're using to bill your service. So even though $3,800 a year might seem low, that's what it is now. We don't know what it would be next year, the year after that. And so often I've seen systems upgraded to a certain product, and then the planned obsolescence 2, 3, 5, some point down the road, that becomes obsolete, and then you have to upgrade to the newer technology, and you're a slave to that cycle. So that kind of scares me. And I'm also struck at the cost of replacement. That's $100,000 plus is money. So the meter, if a meter goes now, the meter that it's replaced with, that's a meter head that would be compliant with a smart meter conversion at some point in the future.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just doing a little amount of Googling here, and there are many smart meters that do cell signals.
Yes. And so I really would, Alan, can I ask you a question? David?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Alan, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
It used to be that 2 water and sewer staffers would drive around to read meters together. Or is that still the practice now, or has that changed?
No, generally one person can do the whole town. Depending on the weather, you can do it all in one day if you really have to.
So they're not doing them in tandem anymore.
No, one person can go out and do it in like a day if they're moving quickly and get it all.
Okay.
Again, a little casual Googling. Depending on the brand you use, one of the bill, this is an awesome reason to have ours, is that they would spot runaway usage. So it may be that we just need to do an RFP and see what's out there. But I mean, I'm not a water customer, but it would give me great comfort to know that I can go to Bora Bora on vacation and have something warning before I come back and my house is full of water.
Mhm.
And you're done.
And for me, you're sitting on a lot of money as an asset that you need to reinvest in your system and reinvest in your system in a manner that is advanced technology. And I truly believe that. And if you didn't have the money and you didn't have the capabilities to do that, we'd be talking about a different story here.
Yeah.
But I think that before you guys can make any decisions, it goes back to inventory. You need to know true numbers before you can even do an RFP. How many are what kind of meters,
Right.
for what kind of usage?
Yeah, I'm very psyched though. The more I read here, city of Allen, Texas, for example, theirs is set up to say if a single family residential home detects at least 3 gallons of water used every hour for a minimum of 24 hours. So 24 hours in a row, you're using at least 3 gallons. That's considered a leak, and you can immediately get a text wherever you are. It's just, hey, your house is leaking. That's Texas algorithm.
They set some.
Yeah, I'm sure they set some mark. But yeah, in the middle of the night, you're not typically expecting to be using a lot of water, but I don't know. I'm not a water engineer, but it sounds like there's a lot of possibilities that if we choose the right brand, it could be cheap. It could have benefits other than less time walking up to houses in hip deep snow to read their meter.
So kind of just so that I've got absorbed this. So right now we have analog meters that has little digital thumb wheels on them, and you just read numbers across. And then the next month you read the next, and then you subtract the 2. That's how many gallons. So what has been looked at right now is just something you would install and then you drive by and it transmits to you.
Yeah, it would drive by, transmit to the device, and then that device would just get uploaded into the system automatically. So you'd still have your start number, your finish number, and then your difference.
Some sort of data logger, and that, right, whether you do it Bluetooth or hook it in, it just downloads everything and populates whatever sheet you have.
But it sounds like that's one permutation or one scenario. Jay, if like the only way it's telling you real time is if it's sending information in.
Right. If it's just got a constant cell signal out.
Yeah.
So, and cell meaning Wi-Fi or a mobile?
Cellular, mobile phone
Cellular.
network.
So that will add to the cost, right?
Yes.
Well, apparently they use low power cell transmitters. I don't know.
So they'd have their own actual cell system for transmitting and receiving.
Yeah, I don't know if it would tie into like the Verizon network or what, but you know, there's questions we need to research before we start writing checks.
Because I would think for an individual to know that information, then you've got to have, whether it's the water plant turn around and go, we think your water hose is leaking, sends you an email, or if it's on some sort of Wi-Fi system it's able to send back to you.
Well, if it's using a cell signal to upload to the central computer at the water plant or wherever it's physically located, I think it's the water plant that then says, give us your cell number, and if we detect a leak at your address, we'll send you a text. I don't think it has to be Wi-Fi.
I bet it's in their database, if that in that system, that it automatically will send the user a notification that you don't have to have the water and sewer department send.
I don't see any reason why you'd have to have Wi-Fi because you know, low power cellular is pretty well tested technology. You'd be surprised how many things out there run on it.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it strikes me that there may be sort of gold, silver, bronze options here. And we might at least entertain what would a gold.
Right. No, I totally agree.
look like.
Right.
Because, you know, if all we're saving is some time spent driving around writing numbers down versus we're able to spot leaks, I mean.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, that would be a must have.
I think so.
okay.
A related question, David, maybe for Alan. So you showed us the report that is water going into the tank. Is there a meter that shows water going out of the tank?
No, there's just one meter that goes from the water house out, which has to be calibrated every year for the state.
So I was just entertaining the idea that if you want to know if there's a catastrophic leak in the system, which has happened at least once, I contemplate, is there a possibility of a meter on the outflow from the tank? And I raise that for 2 reasons. One, if all of a sudden it's like 5,000 gallons a minute, you know, you have a catastrophic leak somewhere, right? And my second observation is, if we knew what was leaving the tank and we knew what we were charging customers, the difference, the delta would be leakage or lost water.
Yeah.
I think it's worth following up on.
But part of the water never makes it to the tank either, right? If some just gets pumped directly, so you might have to look at what was actually pumped rather than what.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
But-
Also,
yeah. Yeah, it's a funky combination. You're right.
Yeah.
More too.
Yes. Actually, as I recall from up there, there's only one line going in that tank.
Right.
From there, because the water goes through from the well through the system first before it gets to the tank. So
Yeah,
there's
so
only
it's-
one line going out.
Where does it go through the system?
It's a single
It
system,
goes to the
so
main.
as water goes into it, it is both going to the tank and it is going to feeder lines to users.
All right, sort of non-potable water then?
No, it's all the same,
It's just-
as opposed to we have one line that goes into the tank and then it all goes out. It's the same line that's going.
Yeah, if we take 10 gallons out of the ground, 8 of it might go into the tank, 2 might go directly onto a consumer.
and so your testing occurs at what level?
Testing which.
Water testing occurs from where?
So some of those numbers have two testing spots, so like chlorine, I think chlorine is tested at the water house when it goes in, but then
Yeah.
also at the end point, right? So that's where you have your starting chlorine and your finished chlorine.
And those 2 points are one, the water house, and
And then you test what at the wastewater treatment plant when you run the faucet to test chlorine there, right? Which is
Yep.
a end of the line user point.
Just an endpoint like a house or.
Right.
okay.
Kind of see
So it's
how-
not tested at the tank at all, that level. So
Not
the water
inside.
could go directly from the pump house directly over to the water and sewer and
Mhm.
never make it up to the tank. So
Right.
you really don't know what the levels are at the tank.
Mhm.
That's a problem.
Okay. David has had to step away to take a work-related call. Are we ready to move on to the next agenda item, the number of commercial and residential accounts at each property?
Well, are you assigning the task of doing the inventory of the meters next? I mean, are you doing that for this next step? Where's the next step of this process?
I think the next step is we get more research into the various makes and models of a water meter.
Now, and if you can figure out what our inventory is, or at least start on that,
Mhm.
that would probably be helpful as well.
So how
Right.
many meters of which kind, if that's possible?
Right.
And if we don't have it already somewhere, it might be something to collect when we read them
Mhm.
next time, because we'll be going out there, right?
Right, but in a kind of related note, our next agenda topic is how many residential and commercial accounts are at each property. And so that could tie in hopefully somewhat to the number of meters we've got out there, but we have a number of data sources that we've acquired, numbered data, E911 data, and Aaron Farr, Duncan Wardwell, Josh, and I have been looking at these various databases and have been trying to cross-reference them using Excel and pivot tables and so forth. And there are some weird hiccups in the data where this parcel is identified as one thing in one data set and another data set. So the most recent thing I had was Josh had suggested that maybe we just get into a room, bring the numbers up and brainstorm instead of emailing back and forth. And I would be happy to do that if you want to look into doing that.
Yeah, I think that'd probably be our best way to be most efficient.
Can I just ask what, can you just define what you said, NEMRIC, E911, what are the actual data sets that you're looking at? Can I just ask what they,
You want to take that?
Yeah, so we're looking at what we have in the billing system from NEMRIC.
NEMRIC?
And then we have the E911 data that CCRPC was able to provide us, so that has. And
That was
we posted it all.
E911 was from CCRPC?
Yeah, because they get that
Yep.
list.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to write them down.
Yep, we posted it on the website. So that is both residential and commercial. And so Duncan's taken a look, he's assigned parcel IDs to all of the E911 data because there's no parcel ID.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So he sorted that, added that in. And then he did create at least one pivot table, I think, to look
Mhm.
at it. But that's where I think we need to kind of, maybe the four of us sit and look and say like, okay, what is the E911 data really telling us? Like, is it telling us that there's 2 residents at number 3 West Main Street and 1 commercial building or 1 commercial unit, or is it just telling us multiple residents?
Okay, so
That-
E911 is mixed combined data.
It-
Can I ask you a
It
question about
might
the
be.
number?
I think we need to look at it a little bit more in detail to determine exactly what that data is telling us and how can we compare that to numbers.
And the NEMRC data, I don't even want to be clear,
Mhm.
is the NEMRC data the billing information of the client, the customers that you are billing? Is that the NEMRC data that you're using?
It has
The water and sewer NEMRC data.
Right, water and sewer network data that
Okay.
will say this unit or this property has 2 fixed residential costs and 1 fixed commercial
Okay.
cost.
NEMRC also, the reason I'm asking is NEMRC also has your assessor's data, which says how many units are in a property. So that's why I was wanting to make sure which NEMRC data you were using, because there's 2 data sets from NEMRC.
The billing data. Right.
So the billing data is what you're basically checking all your other data against.
That's because that's what we're billing.
So you have another set of data from NEMRC, which is the assessor data that tells you number of units. If there's a house with an accessory dwelling,
Mhm.
if it's an apartment building with 4 units, you have another data set, is all I'm saying.
Can you go into NEMRC and pull up the same parcel and look at the water and sewer billing data and look at the Lister card data for the property?
I
I
don't,
think you can filter NEMRC's assessor data based on town water, municipal water and sewer. Because that would be potentially
Mhm.
that, or you could do it based on potential road addresses, but the parcel ID numbers
Mhm.
are driven by road names.
yeah, I feel like I asked that question when we were first looking into data sets, because I think you brought that up before. And I don't know if it has like actual number, it might have residential units, if it's, I guess what happens if it's a duplex or not. Would it have how many commercial units are in there? That's a smaller set now. Let me follow back up and see what data we can get from NEMRC, because that might be another one to look at.
So
ahead,
David,
Bart.
it strikes me that, as Jay suggested, this sort of sit down and start looking at the data, like you can't start until you start it. And then I think it's not just start and then keep going, but to look at it and say, what does it look like it will take for an investment of time to do this?
Mhm.
And then say, what's reasonable to do that, by whom, by when? Because if it's, looking at 4 different data sets for each address and looking up each one individually, one could picture like 5 minutes per user.
Right.
And it's 5 minutes times whatever it is,
400.
times 400, and you do the math, that's how long it would take.
Mhm.
I'm thinking so we go in eyes open, what's the scope of both the methodology and then what's the scope of the project, so we can eyes
Yeah.
open say, who should do this by when?
It definitely, nonetheless, at the end of the day, that this is something that in the year 2023, it's regrettable that we're having to go to this step, but hopefully we can do it now and maintain the data
Yeah,
so that we're not looking back in 20 years going, gee, how did we figure this out?
yeah.
So that's another good point, Jay. I think as we go through this and we discover like what's the best data set and how to do it, contemplate also a maintenance plan, like
Mhm.
whether it's hooked up with, permitting, because if there are different numbers of units over time, and there may be some margin of error that we'll never know, but the things that are knowable around construction permits to maintain a loop into that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's something that's been somewhat imperfect in the past. Some of us are aware of the end of Tilden Avenue, there's a garage built on top of a line. Because permitting and the water sewer system were not coordinated about, let's make sure nobody builds a building on top of a service.
Yeah, and it's just an unfortunate fact of life that a lot of Vermont government ran on back of the envelope
Yeah.
record keeping for so long. And we don't have a staff of thousands. It's understandable that people said, let next year's group of people worry about it.
Yeah.
But I think we are at the point where we are next year's group of people and it
Yeah.
has to be done, whether it takes time or not. So I'm happy to put in as much
Yeah.
time as it takes.
I just say thank you guys for all the accurate, all the levels that you're looking at, from inventory of meters to inventory of users to
Yeah.
all of this stuff. Thank you.
Well, thank Erin in particular. She has had a lot of energy for looking at these numbers. It's unfortunate she couldn't be here tonight, but She has a very sharp analytical mind.
Cool.
Anything else? Sorry, I had to step out for a minute, so I assume we just finished C and now we're gonna go to D. Discussion of
Yes.
water line,
Yes, the water
service line
inventory.
inventory.
Mhm.
Okay, you want to take this away, Josh?
Yeah, so this is being mandated by the state to do a water line service inventory to look at your water lines are made of. I think they're mostly looking to make sure we don't have lead in our lines. It's also going to include a look at service lines, follow up with Alan on it. He said that both he and Steve have taken the classes and watched the videos on how to do the inventory. And they're looking into kind of what it's going to take, what we have on file, what it's going to take to complete the inventory, and maybe do we need to hire like an engineer to help us figure out what we have in the ground in certain areas. Alan, do you have any more to add to that? Admittedly, that's sort of the extent of my knowledge of this inventory.
Well, it's the inventory is going to be basically, they want to know if there's lead also, but the other thing they want to know is you got to make sure if you have a galvanized service that it did at one time possibly be in connection with lead. But if it did, that line has to be replaced
So
because it
could
might
you,
contain lead.
so galvanized lines also need to be replaced?
He said if it was in connection.
Yeah,
with
that's the big thing. Galvanized lines in the system for people's houses will have to be replaced.
Is that because they might hook up to a lead line, or is that because we all know galvanized pipes also leach lead?
It's the description was if at one point this line did have lead in it, it'll be sitting in the rust and that galvanized line built up, and pieces of that can flake off over time. So the EPA came up with a definition. If it was downstream of lead, it has to be replaced. But if you can't also 100% say it was, you're supposed to mark it down as might contain lead.
Now, a follow-up question, is this just lines like to the meter, or are we exploring throughout the building as well?
It's mainly to customers. It's mainly a customer service, but also on the form, how far you want to go in. They have parcel ID numbers, but also interior house plumbing and a bunch of other categories. Depends how deep in detail you want to go.
Now, back to my first question, is this just lead pipes or inclusive lead? Because a lot of copper pipes have lead solder, a lot of galvanized pipes leach lead.
The answer is at least one lead line, one galvanized line requiring replacement, or any lines where we don't know what they're made out of. Those are the three categories that they want.
Including lead solder?
There may be further detail further down, but the three that the summary says are those three.
So-
Here, you can just repeat that, Jay?
The Vermont's website, quoting the federal lead and copper rule revision from the federal government, says we need a complete inventory of all service connections served. Unfortunately, we're doing that on a parallel track, and systems with at least one lead service line, one galvanized line requiring replacement, or any unknown material line. But there's a line where we don't know what it's made out of. We have to treat it as though we have to replace it. And we have to have all these in by October 16th, 2024.
It's not we. So as I read their definition of service line, it's not just the public service line. It is also what historically was the private service line. So historically, if I remember what Kendall described, from the curb stop, like our valve
Yeah, here we go.
at the line was historically ours. Everything from that valve to the building was private. This service line inspection inventory includes that,
Up to the house.
the things that we never were responsible for,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, it should be open.
So what's the legal ramifications? You have to be very clear that you're also inspecting private portions of service lines, so that you don't assume ownership,
See there, yeah, that's a good,
right?
Yeah, so the diagram I brought up is from the, I'm gonna try to make it bigger.
Thank you.
So they're saying service line parts you need to take into account: the connector, the system on portion of the line, which will be in blue in the image I'm going to show, the curb stop, the customer-owned segment in green, the connector into the building, and the water meter. So all this is
Basically all the way to the water meter.
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think their colors there are accurate.
Okay.
My understanding from Kendall explaining this years ago, from the curb stop in is private. It is not the system. It is customer.
Right.
Now we can resolve that. It sort of doesn't matter because we're talking all the way from the water main to the water meter is
Right.
the,
Service line, right?
and I'm gonna suggest nobody knows.
Right.
Does anybody know what my service line is that leads into my house?
Last time I broke into your basement, I didn't. I didn't
I
write.
would
it.
assume
I don't
it's
think people
galvanized.
know.
I don't think they do.
It is
have-
galvanized.
I
We
think
have-
it's important.
Go ahead, Alan.
we have a book that Trudy did when she started, where she wrote down what was coming in most all buildings in the size of the meter. So we have some of this data already, but I know there are already a couple of galvanized services we already know of on Route 2 already. That
East or west?
have been on the list of, they have tried to negotiate in the past. They might want to replace it because it might leak one day and they might not want that to happen. But there's going to be other ones in there on the older sections.
I think there is a lot more old lines than we think there are, given the age of the buildings in the village and, you know, what people sort of did back in the day.
Yeah.
I think my supply line or service line is the original, which dates from, I don't know what year,
It was state of the art then.
20s, 30s, 40s.
We're talking possibly 100 years old.
Yeah,
So there probably is lead.
it's galvanized.
Mm.
It's not lead,
So,
but is there lead in it?
No, that's
Yeah.
that's my point.
so are you
There was a time when
considering-
lead was just ubiquitous. So
So is the purpose of the inventory maybe because the federal government's going to mandate some changes or come up with some money to help communities do that kind of thing, and is trying to figure out how much to fund this situation? Because they're not making you change anything. They're just making you
They're getting
inventory
data.
at this point.
Yeah.
Well, that's the good news. We only have to inventory. We don't.
I
have to
think
change.
they're trying to figure out how widespread its problem is,
Mhm.
and they're suspecting the worst
Yeah.
because lead was just everywhere.
Well,
Back
that
in
was
the day.
the,
That was the state of the art.
So I think just if we think of this, there's over the horizon, what does it mean once we have the inventory? What do we have to do beyond? And who's going to pay for it? You know,
Be a huge one. Yeah, because I can think of probably a lot of houses, people went and changed all their piping up because they didn't want lead, solder or whatever, but yet now there's this section of pipe.
that was buried out of sight, out of
Yeah.
mind.
And
so I think at least knowing the inventory and it's all the way to the meter, which is, I believe, unprecedented. It's good news that Trudy at least started it. It will, in some cases, be outdated.
Right.
I know my neighbor replaced a service line in the last 5 years.
Well, let me show one more
Post-treaty.
thing that I think might be illustrative. There's an inventory that we are required to complete. This is the inventory for all your single buildings. It's a multi-tab worksheet. I know it's small, but I will read. The header is just, totals. Then here's your instructions. And what they're looking to get along here. They need the address, E911, city, state, zip, span code, latitude and longitude of where it connects. Does this have a lead gooseneck, pigtail, or other connector? Is the service line comprised of multiple materials? Was line material ever previously lead? Current building service line material, current building. I don't know how the difference of that is. It reads like the same thing. Installation date, diameter. How did you find out the line material? And then skipping over here. Is it galvanized requiring replacement? Information about the building itself, building type, interior plumbing, what materials are used the most? Interior plumbing, what materials used second most, interior plumbing installation date.
Hmm.
So it's a lot of data they're looking to get.
Some of which is impossible to get. When
Yep.
was that line installed? You're the fourth owner.
Yeah.
When was your line installed, Morgan? How would you know?
Is
No.
all of it required is my question. Sometimes
I
I
don't
say
have to find out.
optional or required.
We'll have to
Obviously,
research.
I believe everything in red is required, I think, on there.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
remember correctly from the class.
So if we thought of this as our first conceptual walkthrough, it's gonna have to turn into a work plan, and to the point made earlier, it may be a contractor and contractor cost. And some of the stuff, I don't know how we'll know what the things that are buried under the ground, how will we know if it's not part of an existing inventory?
Yep.
Well, just reach out to Ben Montrose at the state. We'd also talk to the BLCT equivalent. Do they have any guidance?
I just started with that. Right?
Okay. Well, I think there's, people we can reach out to for how are they doing, and do they really want, did they really need to know what time Bard goes to bed at night and what his favorite bedtime reading is? Do we really need to go to that level? If we turn in something saying our buildings are old, we have no idea what's running between the bathroom and the bedroom. Does that mean we disqualify, or?
Yeah, we can reach out to some other superintendents too and find out how are those systems attacking.
Because it's a federal deadline to this, right?
Yeah, October 2024.
Sounds like an unfunded mandate to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, I would think so. Now,
Alan,
mind you, once we've got it, I won't mind having that data,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's going to be a hell of a bear to get it.
Alan,
Time
did you
check.
have
We've got
something?
about 20 minutes worth of
Yeah.
stuff to cover in about 8
I think
minutes.
Alan had one more.
Go ahead,
on this
Alan.
topic.
Yes, and once it's submitted, it's supposed to be renewed it's supposed to be updated every single year after, once you have it in there for 2024 too.
That's okay.
And it's a matter of keeping track of what you replace.
Well, it means you require a permit for the replacement, and then you need to link the permitting
Yep.
of the line replacement to the inventory. So there's some process
Yeah.
questions, I think.
True.
Yeah.
If I can make a suggestion, we have two major bullet points and warrants and purchase orders. The water and sewer superintendent search can be summed up in about 20 seconds. And could we maybe just make the budget status the first item on next time agenda?
That's okay with me.
Okay. I can basically give you the water and wastewater superintendent search. Morgan and I and Josh interviewed 3 candidates, including Alan, our internal candidate. We were very impressed by one particular candidate who would have been amazing, but his current employer made him an offer we couldn't top. So we went to our second candidate. He was also pretty qualified. His employer made him an offer, and their benefits package was something we just simply couldn't match. And given that Josh has spoken with Alan about some performance improvements that he feels Alan should be making, and Alan is on good track to make those improvements. So right now, we do not have a candidate to hire. We're kind of keeping the matter open. And Josh, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah.
Nope, no, it sums up well. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to approval of minutes, warrants, and purchase orders. Let's start with the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the January 3rd meeting, please?
I move we approve the minutes of January 3rd meeting.
Thank you, Jay.
Second.
Thank you, Morgan. Anybody see any suggestions for changes or edits to those draft minutes?
Nope.
Excellent. So at this time, I would ask for your vote. Please identify yourself and signify your vote on approval of the minutes for January 3rd.
Jay, aye.
Morgan, I.
Bard, aye.
And David, I. Minutes, warrants, and purchase order.
And no purchase orders, we just have the 2 warrants.
Okay, I move we accept the water warrants as presented.
I second it. This is Morgan.
Any discussion, questions, concerns? Hearing none, calling the motion to a vote, please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Jay, aye.
Morgan, I.
Bard, aye.
And David, aye. So moving on to items for next agenda, we are moving down the review of the second quarter financials. We will be following up on the Borman letter with discussion on rates, equivalent unit and usage.
And I hope that Aaron and Josh and Duncan and I can meet to take the data about the commercial and the residential and commercial, the number of units to the next steps. We have something to report out.
Okay. Anything else?
one suggestion I'd make, David, is, given the number of items within the financials, we might want to give it more than 10 minutes.
Yeah, I was wondering how we were going to do that in 10 minutes.
One quick question, maybe I could just, here it starts out, including for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 23, but we've been talking about second quarter stuff here.
Is that in the memo? You're right,
Yeah.
the wrong quarter.
I just- Right, the first line, right
Yeah,
under,
no, sorry, that should have been second quarter
Okay.
of FY 23.
all right,
Yeah.
My mistake, apologies.
you're trying to confuse me, so
I probably copied and pasted
You-
from
that's
one,
right.
and yeah, so sorry about
you
that.
almost got me.
Well, you got me.
Anything else to come before this commission tonight?
I move we adjourn.
Hey,
Thank you,
second,
Jay. Thank you, Morgan.
Jay, aye.
Morgan, I.
Aye.
David, I. We
Yeah.
are adjourned.
Thanks,
4
y'all.
minutes early.
Yeah.